All right, so welcome everybody to this roundtable discussion meeting today, which is on the topic of exploring the role of the blue economy in achieving a sustainable ocean. This event is being hosted to wrap up the third theme of our Turning the Tide project, Systems Thinking for a Sustainable Ocean, which has focused on the blue economy. So we're really delighted to be joined by several experts today who are going to be taking a deep dive into this topic area. This meeting is being hosted in collaboration with Ocean and Coastal Futures, and representing them today, we have got one of their directors, David Tudor, who is going to be chairing the session and has got a wealth of expertise in this area. So with that, I will hand over to David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. It's an honour to be hosting this in-depth roundtable today, as Joe said, entitled Exploring the Role of the Blue Economy in Achieving a Sustainable Ocean. Again, as Joe said, this is a collaboration with the Institution of Environmental Science and Ocean and Coastal Futures, who I'm a director of. My name is David Tudor. I just wanted to set the scene just a little bit, really. So at the start of last year, the IES launched this year-long project, Turning the Tide, Systems Thinking for a Sustainable Ocean. And I think it's that systems thinking that is really key there. And I think the IES are really championing that element of it and an approach to issues that are affecting the marine and coastal environment, bringing together the marine and coastal science and practitioner community via a series of online events and publications. And one of those events we're here today. And we're here today to talk about the blue economy. And I have with me today an extremely knowledgeable and experienced panel. So the first thing I really like to do is ask the panel to introduce themselves. And if I could ask you just to say a little bit about your experience and the relevance and your perspective you bring to this topic of discussion today. So I will start off with Louise Heaps of WWF.
Hi there. So I am Louise Heaps. I lead the Sustainable Blue Economy Initiative for WWF globally. I've been working on sustainable blue economy for around probably 8 years now, working on anything from the sort of policy and enabling environment that's needed to looking at how to influence blue finance. So I guess bluing finance, and also how to bring new finance streams into the ocean biome. So essentially financing blue. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. I'd like to hand over now to Nick Hardman-Mountford of the Commonwealth.
Thanks, David. My name is Nick Hardman-Mountford. As you said, I'm Head of Oceans and Natural Resources at the Commonwealth Secretariat. I have a background in marine sciences and spent many years sort of doing research on the ocean, understanding the ocean, and then moved over to the Commonwealth to look at how we can combine scientific, legal, economic knowledge to help particularly developing countries in the Commonwealth develop a sustainable blue economy. So the Commonwealth has 49 of its 56 members are coastal states, 25 small island developing states. We've got about a third of the world and ocean under national jurisdiction within the Commonwealth, and about nearly half the world's coral reefs, a third of the mangroves. So ocean is really important to Commonwealth countries. They've made that very clear to us and have agreed to work together on a sustainable ocean and a sustainable ocean economy through the Commonwealth Blue Charter. And so in my role, we work with countries to implement the Blue Charter and various sort of governance reforms to help them with a sustainable blue economy.
Great. Thank you, Nick. I'd like to hand over now to Claire Evans from the National Oceanography Centre.
Thanks, David. So it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. My name's Claire Evans, as said, and I'm from the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton. I'm a principal biogeochemist, so I'm mainly concerned with my work themes about how carbon is cycled through the Earth system. But in doing that, of course, you have to integrate all the different perspectives. So not just the environment, but also the social economic component as well, and the governance. So a lot of the projects I do looks at how we manage our environment and what impacts that can have on carbon and how that's cycled through our systems, but also the co-benefits of how we manage those ecosystems as well. So looking at the cultural benefits they bring, and also other ecosystem services upon which we rely, and how best to govern and manage that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claire. And finally, James Merchant from the Marine Conservation Society. James.
Thanks, David, and hi, everybody. I am James Merchant. I lead up the marine natural capital work at the Marine Conservation Society. This work is a mix of research and advocacy that is explaining the value of marine ecosystems and species to society, to governments, to the financial sector. And we're very much working on this theme of building a sustainable blue economy and collaborating with the different stakeholders involved, which I think we'll get onto a bit later. And more recently, we're creating a podcast series with the law firm Simmons & Simmons, which is about all the different elements of building a sustainable blue economy and bringing in expert speakers to share their insights on that as well.
Thanks, James. That's great. Well, thanks everybody for introducing yourselves, and I'll keep it nice and slow and easy at the moment. So today, I'm sure we're going to cover many topics, ranging from industry, fisheries, offshore renewable energy, oil and gas, aquaculture, conservation, natural capital, all the things we've talked about really, as well as broader themes around sustainability, equity, science and policy. So I'd just like to start off really just asking you to give a brief definition of what the blue economy is. And I think that's really important for the people watching this later on, really, to what you consider to be the blue economy, because it's a term that's kind of used quite a lot these days, but it kind of means different things to different people in different places. So I'd like to just start off with that. So what is the blue economy for you and your organization? I'll start with you, James.
Yeah, sure. Well, the blue economy itself is pretty broad. It's any activity that takes place in the coastal and marine environment. I think a lot of the stuff that you listed, from fishing to shipping to oil and gas, and also regenerative, restorative projects as well. And all of these have different impacts. So I think probably the bigger question is what the blue economy looks like and what its impact is, because there can be a big difference between an extractive blue economy and a more regenerative one, which I think is a key difference. And that's very much what this discussion around sustainable blue economy comes back to.
Thank you, James. I'll keep going around very briefly. Louise.
Yeah, thanks very much. So this is interesting to me because this definition of a blue economy and a sustainable blue economy seems to be an ongoing narrative that nobody's really landed on a final agreement of what this is. So from our perspective, a blue economy is used to describe business as usual, basically what is going on in the ocean and what the economic gains are. So from our perspective, it's more looking at the sort of extractive side of things, and it might include activities that we don't consider to be part of a sustainable blue economy, including things like oil and gas and deep sea mining, which we do not consider to be part of a sustainable blue economy. So we do have a very strong definition for what a sustainable blue economy is, which I'll just read out if I may. So it's three key bullets. It's one that provides social and economic benefits for current and future generations. It restores, protects and maintains diverse, productive and resilient marine ecosystems. And it's based on clean technologies, renewable energy and circular material flows. And that definition has actually now been adopted by big organisations like UNEP-FI. The World Bank has used aspects of it. I mean, their definition is not a million miles away from there. And I think it would be helpful over the coming year as we work towards UNOC 25 to really start to hone this down and get common agreement on what a blue economy and what a sustainable blue economy is. Thank you.
That's really useful. Thank you. I'll continue around. Claire.
Thank you. So I would tend to agree with what my colleagues on the panel here have said already. But I think for us at the NOC, what's so important is driving the blue economy forward in a sustainable way. So I think exactly what the panel has said, and we are hoping to underpin all those key goods and services that the oceans provide in terms of providing that science and innovation so that they can be carried out in a sustainable manner that is not degrading our environment into the future.
Thanks, Claire. And finally, Nick.
Thank you. And yeah, it's interesting just hearing this discussion, even because when I started sort of working on a blue economy, I was taking the definition of blue as in green in the green economy for the ocean, and that a blue economy is a sustainable ocean economy and is not the same as the ocean economy as a whole. However, when you look at how it's used around the world, that is clearly not the case. People talk about blue economy activities for things that are completely unsustainable. And fighting for that definition, I think, is important. I think we need to have a definition of a blue economy that is a sustainable blue economy. But we also need to be realistic. To separate out the blue economy or the sustainable blue economy from the business as usual ocean economy as two separate things, and you're either in one or the other, doesn't really help anybody. What we need to be thinking about is a transition towards a sustainable blue economy. How do we transition the ocean economy towards that state of sustainable and regenerative use in a way that takes all those who rely on the ocean for their lives and livelihoods with them on the journey? And so I like to talk about bluing the ocean economy as we move towards that sustainable blue economy.
Thanks, Nick. So I think that was really interesting, really. You know, I think my question was, you know, how to define the blue economy, and all of you used the word sustainable in there. And also, I think as Nick kind of touched on there, you know, having two, you know, I think you said, Louise, there's the blue economy, which is business as usual, sustainable, or hoping to move to a more sustainable blue economy. So I want to just concentrate, I think, on that, this sustainable bit. So, you know, the ocean economy, let's call it, rather than the blue economy, you know, what's going on in the ocean is growing rapidly. So how I'd like to ask you really and think about, and you've touched on it, but really to get into some more depth here about how we can ensure that this is happening in a sustainable way with the financial decisions or with the activities themselves, really. And before we do that, I just wanted to read out the definition of a sustainable blue economy from the UN Environment Programme. And it's pretty similar to what you said, Louise, actually. So a little bit of repetition here. So the United Nations Environment Programme says, a sustainable blue economy is the sustainable use of the ocean and coastal resources, which generates equitably and inclusively distributed benefits for people, protects and restores healthy ocean ecosystems, and contributes to the delivery of global ambitions for a sustainable future. So very, very much mirrors what you said there, Louise. And it's interesting that many of you talked about really nailing this definition down for a blue economy. So anyway, let's concentrate on the sustainable bit, really. So how can we ensure that the blue economy, as it grows and the ocean economy grows, that's happening in a sustainable way? So let's start with you, James. You talked about extractive or regenerative. So how can we do this in a sustainable way?
The way we're looking at it is that the sustainable approach is to build a blue economy around the value of marine natural capital. So putting marine assets and ecosystems at the center of it, because at the end of the day, that's what props up the economy. That's what provides the value, whether it's things like food from the fish we catch, or if it's renewable energy or other resources. There's loads of benefits we get from the marine environment. If we go with an extractive approach, which we have for the last few decades, there's a limit as to how much the ocean can provide us with that. At some point, the ecosystems get so degraded that they can no longer provide these benefits indefinitely. So that's more of a boom and then bust approach. Whereas if you center the blue economy around, first of all, maintaining and protecting a certain level of marine natural capital and then working to enhance it, then I think the sky's the limit then in terms of how long and how much you can enjoy these benefits for, but then also the new sort of opportunities that might come out of it. So one big sector of the blue economy that we've not really tapped into as much as we could is leisure, recreation and tourism. That's something that's very much linked to good water quality. And the way that we're treating our marine environment, particularly around the UK, is really degrading the quality of waters. So we're not able to take advantage of those opportunities. So if we put marine natural capital at the centre and we build everything around protecting and maintaining a healthy level of marine natural capital, then we will see new types of opportunities, and it will continue to support a lot of industries that are already very reliant on it. So in a nutshell, I think it comes down to extractive versus regenerative.
Thanks, James. And just to kind of, I suppose for the UK you mentioned there, why do you think that, or rather, how does one get that at the forefront, the natural capital approach? How do you get it at the forefront of decision making in the future? Is it politicians, the public? Is it industry? And how would you go about doing that?
It's a great question. I think you have to build up the general ocean literacy, because we as a society, as decision makers, and even going into the financial sector and the economy, we don't realize and respect how much value is provided by the ocean and how much we are relying on it. And by ignoring it, we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot. So a big element is advocacy. I think it's working with people, not just telling them off for doing the wrong thing, helping people see the value of the oceans, and then the opportunities that are gained by protecting it. I think the message of fear only works to an extent. I think people hide away from things they're scared of, but if you present opportunities and things we can move towards, there's an element of potential in that as well.
Right, thanks, James. Saw some nods around the virtual table there. Louise, I'm going to come to you really, and just thinking about the question really about how to ensure that the ocean economy grows in a sustainable way, but also perhaps some of the financial decisions that are aligned with the sustainability goals. I wonder if you could think about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think ultimately, and it goes back to what James was saying, that there is a high risk associated with the ocean ecosystem in terms of financing it. It has there are data limitations and challenges, as we well know. So we really need to strengthen the enabling environment, essentially, in order to reduce the risk or de-risk that environment, so that it attracts private sector finance going forward. So there simply isn't enough funding at the moment, or finance at the moment, under ODA or philanthropy to actually enable this transition that Nick was talking about. And we're really going to have to start leveraging some of this private sector finance. I think most importantly, we need to redirect mainstream finance away from destructive business as usual practices. And so there is a need to work and engage with the finance sector to really show them what the risks are if they continue with business as usual. And then the aim would be to ensure that there's sufficient pipeline and interest in the sustainable ocean economy, for then finance to start flowing towards that. There's also going to be a lot more finance needed to support the restoration, protection, and sustainable management of the ocean's natural assets, which, again, as James said, are the bedrock of a sustainable blue economy. So it's really kind of trying to make sure that the users of the marine environment understand that, and the financiers of the marine environment understand that, and that we start investing and financing that bedrock that's really going to support a sustainable ocean economy going forwards. So the enabling environment is going to be absolutely key, and part of that, and I'm sure that Nick can talk a lot more about this from a government perspective, will be to have strong regulation in place and sustainable ocean plans, or sustainable blue economy plans, that really, again, as James has highlighted, put the marine biodiversity and the ocean's natural assets as an absolute priority across all of the ministries. So they're all working towards the same aim as the basis of that economy. And with a strong regulation in place and other key enablers, that in itself starts to de-risk that finance ecosystem, if you like, and it's easier for finance to flow from there. I'll just leave it at that. There's lots more, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Louise. And just to follow up on something you said, really, so you must talk to business, big business a lot, and you talked about redirecting the finance away from business as usual, and you also talked about illustrating the risks. What, in your experience, what's the kind of traction you get when you illustrate those risks? Is it a mixed picture, or is it very clear to all businesses that there's an impact and risks involved in what they're doing?
It's very mixed at the moment, but I think there are some sort of those at the forefront that are really starting to understand and feel the risks. So the insurance sector in particular is one that comes to mind. They're seeing significant risks, particularly coastal real estate is now selling at around 7% less in the US because of the risks associated with coastal storm surges along the coast. So we actually developed a report back in 2022 called Navigating Ocean Risks, which actually assessed the financial risks associated with business as usual across 6 maritime sectors. And we found that there were losses, for potential losses of up to $8.4 trillion over the next 15 years to assets. This was specifically aimed at the investor sector if we continue with business as usual. But if we go along a sustainable development trajectory, those losses could be significantly reduced. Given this was using a 1.8 degree scenario, and there were still losses associated with a 1.8 degree scenario, even under a sustainable development trajectory. But certainly the losses would be significantly reduced. And that hopefully it's those kinds of business case reports that are really starting to turn the attention of the finance sector in particular.
Thanks, Louise. I'll come to you now, Nick, because I suppose similarly where Louise is looking at business, we talked about business rather just now, you work a lot with governments. So from that perspective, really, again, going back to the question around, the ocean economy is growing, blue economy is growing. How can we ensure that it's happening in a sustainable way? What's your experience or what's your belief around how to do that? But also, what are you hearing from the governments that you work with?
Yeah. So there's two ways, two things that we really need to think about here. What do we mean by growth in the ocean economy and growth in the economy as a whole? Because that's fundamental to sustainability, and one of the SDGs is about sustainable models of production and consumption. And the other is, what are the key tools we've got to make progressive action on a sustainable ocean economy? And you can't just have a lot of new ideas in about how you do a sustainable economy without changing something about what exists already. And the levers we have to do that are in legislation, policy, regulation, taxation, subsidies, essentially government business. So unless you've got governments really understanding what the vision of a sustainable blue economy is, how it's going to benefit them, not just in terms of protecting their ecosystems, but protecting their populations, the food security, the energy security, ultimately votes to keep them in power, then there's not going to be a willingness to shift towards a sustainable blue economy. So these things tie together. So if we go back to defining the economy, one of the key challenges is we don't measure a lot of the impact we have. We only measure what we get out of the ocean. That's the extractive model. And we talked about natural capital and natural capital accounting and really starting to account for nature in the economy. That's really important. It's not the only pool of capital we need to account for. We need to look at natural capital, social capital, human capital, knowledge capital, as well as physical infrastructure and financial capital, all of it together holistically, because then we see what we call growth, which is an increase in the flow of money through the economy, GDP. Actually, we see when we're just moving money between pools of capital versus when we're actually getting something new. And we can only get something new when we move away from finitely constrained resources. So if we're extracting something that is finite from the environment, that's going to be capped how much you can grow, and you're actually borrowing from one pool wealth, and this is based in some work that's been done by the Bennett Institute for Public Policy at Cambridge around the wealth economy. You know, if you are just shifting things between these pools of capital, you're not growing anything. But innovation is unconstrained. So if you grow your knowledge economy, you're going to grow your economy, and there's a massive role for innovation in a sustainable blue economy. Social capital is so far from being saturated that there's massive opportunity for growth there. Natural capital is pretty much exploited, but if we transition from extractive to regenerative, as James was saying, then there's you're basically, instead of just using what the product is, you're using the services that the ocean delivers. Then that is something that you can continue using, and so again, there's room for growth in the economy. But until you start to measure this in a different way, you're not going to be able to see really how all the knock-on effects in the ecosystem are. So it comes down to a basic government thing: accounting. How do we account for this on our national balance books? And there's been a whole move towards something called ocean accounts and the Ocean Accounting Partnership, which really tries to put all these things on one spreadsheet and say everything we've got in the ocean, all our assets there, are measured together, whether it's a port or whether it's a mangrove forest. And then we can, you don't have to value them all the same. The valuation methods can change, but you've at least got a log of them. Now, the advantage to governments of that is that can improve your credit rating and improve the access to finance. It can mean you can borrow money cheaper. And so there's some real benefits to government to capturing this and starting to manage it, because you don't manage what you don't measure in terms of developing a sustainable blue economy. So I think that's critical there. And then we've got some basic things to do about the way we fund our economies. So if you don't change your taxation and regulation, you're just going to grow the amount of activity in the economy, but you're going to have knock-on effects that are still perverse. So we see it with energy at the moment. We've got a huge rise in renewable energy, but the demand for energy is still increasing, and we're not cutting fossil fuel production. And so we've got to look at what are the incentives for green shipping. We've got to look at how we cut harmful subsidies to fishing and get countries really signing up to the WTO fisheries subsidies agreement, which is a commitment by all countries anyway under SDG 14. So getting countries to deliver on these things is important. Making sure that they're reviewing their taxation, reviewing their financial policies, reviewing their legislation, regulation in line with the sustainable blue economy. And that's what we do. We work with governments to review that, to help them put in place national ocean policies that really look at that holistically. So
thanks, Nick. It's really interesting you talking about the accounting and ocean accounts. In the members of the Commonwealth, is that getting traction? Are there some countries that are either doing it, want to do it, or intend to create these ocean accounts?
It is getting quite a lot of traction, both in sort of small island developing states like Fiji and some of the larger economies. The UK is a big champion of ocean accounts, has been helping fund the Ocean Accounts Partnership, as have Canada and Australia. So while it's being explored by governments, they're funding the partnership, they're helping develop the concepts. It's not being used in earnest yet, but at least there's progress in that direction. And yes, we do have strong government support for it from a number of sectors, a number of quarters, I should say, and that's helping really thrash out the methodologies that are going to be needed to implement this.
Thanks. I'll come to you now, Claire. I suppose the same question really around, the ocean economy is growing. How can we ensure that it's happening in a sustainable way? But also perhaps for yourself, thinking about the role of marine and coastal science in ensuring that we have a sustainable blue economy.
Sure, absolutely. So I would always advocate for a pragmatic approach. And I think we've heard again and again from the other panelists here about the importance of putting a number on something. So this natural capital accounting, and it's something we're actually applying this framework as well in the UK to look at the seagrasses at the moment. So it's really fantastic because it's integrating ecosystem services, cultural services, as well as looking at governance structures and so on and so forth. So, and I think the barriers we have with the marine environment are, of course, you can't see it a lot of the time. It's all below the water. So in terms of people's understanding, it's hard to know that your seabed or your coastal system is being degraded. And I think because of that, by virtue of that, there is just a lag behind sort of terrestrial systems that we can see in terms of holding people to account when they are degrading or damaging these environments. And so certainly, you know, having this natural capital assessment where we look more broadly allows us not just to look at the value of what we take out, but then the long-term damage that's being done. And then we can do proper cost-benefit analysis. Now, I think in terms of managing our coastal environment, we have a whole host of challenges such as land tenure rights, you know, equity with Indigenous and local communities. So we have to address those issues. It has to be something that's quite inclusive. So we really need that cross-sectoral engagement. So as scientists, we need to be providing that knowledge that underpins, well, what are the consequences of activities and driving innovation forward. But also we need to have a participatory approach with governance and business and those local communities to bring everyone along in that discussion, and ultimately create a sort of favourable legislative and financial landscape or seascape, if you like, where doing the right sustainable thing becomes the right economic thing, if that makes sense. So it's about having those incentives in place and having them based on a good scientific footing that is equitable to all participants.
Thank you, Claire. I just wanted to pick up on something you said, and perhaps something that James said earlier, actually, around the science. And for you, Claire, and then I'll come to James, do you get the sense that the lack of science in certain areas, or perceived lack of science, is holding things back, or allowing people to make decisions that aren't perhaps as robust as they could be? And I guess what I'm saying is the excuse sometimes there's not enough science, therefore we can't measure the biodiversity benefits of salt marsh or seagrass or the carbon value, therefore we can't apply it. Are you getting the sense that science is used as an excuse almost, that we don't have enough?
So I wouldn't say an excuse, although probably in some context, but what I would say is the science we need, there isn't enough, and every scientist will always tell you we don't have enough numbers, so I'm going to tell you that now. But what people tend to do, so as I say, I'm a carbon biogeochemist, and so some of my work is around how do we restore coastal vegetated habitats, because they are very good at sort of binding, sequestering that carbon and taking it out of our atmosphere. Now, the problem with that is, you know, there's some really gung-ho schemes, and I applaud it, but they're based on extrapolations from values that might be quite meaningless. And actually, what we need to understand is what drives those values. So I'm, you know, within my group, we're trying to get to the bottom of that. So I think that's a big problem. And yes, we do, particularly when it comes to biodiversity and those co-benefits, we definitely don't have the holistic picture. And I think what scares me is we're running into a situation where we might implement some large policy decisions. Like there's a lot of talk around restoring mangroves in various places, but actually a lot of these fail because we're not being inclusive of global change that might happen into the future, or the actual sort of physical environment that's suitable for restoring these things. So we need to do that. And when you think about it as well, monocultures aren't resilient, you know, so we have to get that knowledge first to ensure that our good efforts don't fail, and then investors lose confidence. And I think the other important part of that as well is saying to investors now, who are the earlier adopters, who are getting behind these sort of restoration and management schemes in coastal environments, that you are a pioneer and things might fail, but that's okay because you're helping us to drive forward that environment where we can try things and learn and then do things iteratively into the future, you know, so improve as we go along. So I think that that's also really key.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to come to you, James, and if Louise and Nick have anything to add on this one, I'll let you in a second. You mentioned ocean literacy and advocacy, James, around how you create the change. So just on this point around the science that Claire's been talking about, do you find that when you want to talk about regeneration or restoration, particularly with regard to finance, do you get a sense that there's almost a response that there isn't enough science, or there isn't enough robust science, or we don't have all the answers yet? So let's not act too quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly when it comes to getting investment into coastal habitats, things like blue carbon habitats, we don't have the full data to quantify the benefits we're getting from them, which makes it a challenge when you try to link that up into markets. But on a more basic level, I think we do know enough to get the basics right. We know that we have these blue carbon habitats around the UK, for example, and we know that they are superhero habitats. They protect possibly billions of pounds of infrastructure from flooding and coastal erosion. They're absorbing all this carbon. We might not know exactly to what extent they are superhero habitats, but we know that they're important. So it'd be great to see a sort of precautionary principle applied where we know these are important. We might not know an exact figure of what they do, but let's protect them anyway. And while we're doing that, whilst we're getting the data and the more complete information, we can still get the basics right, which is ecological conditions. So improving water quality, which is really poor around the UK, and that is a big barrier when it comes to restoring habitats and protecting habitats. And then you can scale up public funding, which can de-risk and expand some of these projects as well to bring in private investment down the line. So absolutely, we need more data, but it shouldn't delay what action we can do now, which when we get the data will make things so much easier for us.
Thanks. Nick or Louise, would you like to add anything on the science question?
Yeah, thanks. Marine science is absolutely critical for underpinning decision making in developing a sustainable blue economy. And yet there's a lack of capacity globally in marine science. So a lot of the governments we work with really have very few people trained to do marine science, to be able to bring that evidence base they need for locally based policy and decision making. And so there's two things. Firstly, you've got to be realistic. If you are in somewhere like Kiribati, which is a least developed country, 811 square kilometers of land and about 4,000 times that area in ocean. I mean, its ocean area stretches about the width of the continental US. That's a huge amount of area with a very small population that you need to be able to manage and enforce regulation over. And so clearly technology is going to play a role that needs to, but then you need to be trained in the access to that technology, how to use it, making sure you can get it at an affordable rate, because with a small population, that's the only way you're going to be able to deliver that. And then there's the impact that having science into government decision making makes. If you've got policymakers who are trained in science, who understand how to interpret science and bring that evidence base into the discussions that government is having, it's shown that it completely changes the nature of the dialogue and can really bring a robustness that it was not there beforehand to what is often political decision making. And so really, it's massively important to increase scientific training and capacity generally, and particularly in the marine sciences for a sustainable blue economy in all countries, particularly across the global south.
Thanks, Nick. Just on that, Louise, you go ahead.
well, I was just going to add a couple of things. So, just to speak to what's already been said and completely agree. I think just in terms of what James was saying, we need to get a lot better at calculating avoided costs. So how much is it going to cost if we don't act now, essentially? And I think that's going to be extremely helpful for government decision making. So looking at the sort of natural capital, really getting strong on how to measure the science around that, and then looking at what the avoided costs would be. I think that is something we really need to get much stronger at. The other thing I was going to say in terms of sort of more business end and science, there's a lot of opportunity for scientists and business to work together to really start to pull together some really applied science. So what we'd like to see is businesses operating within the ocean, actually collecting data that's going to be needed to help more effective management of the ocean's natural resources. So I think there's a lot of partnershiping that is needed going forward to really strengthen the science, and also, to, as I said, to make sure that it's science that's applied and it's actually being collected to deliver an outcome. And I think, you know, I'd like to see a lot more of that going forward, and a lot more PhDs and scientific research being much more applied to the needs of the management of the ocean. Thanks.
Thanks. And just to kind of segue into into innovation and technology, I'll come to you, Claire, in a second. Nick mentioned these vast areas of ocean, and I think we all know that there's more satellite capability, drones, whatever it might be. I mean, I think coming to you, Claire, in your institution in NOC, for example, what do you see as the role of innovation and technology in, I guess, in realizing this sustainable blue economy?
Thanks. Actually, that's a really good question. I think it's going to be absolutely invaluable because at the moment, of course, NOC is really leading the way with technological development and things like autonomous vehicles and satellite based monitoring and drone based monitoring and habitat mapping and so on and so forth. And this will be key. So we can basically use this for looking at global change. We can expand our capacity to look at the oceans vastly by using autonomous technologies. It is so much cheaper than putting a ship out there. And we are developing sensors for numerous different parameters. So we can basically start to monitor our oceans in a way that we just haven't been able to before. And also with the improved remote sensing, in terms of looking at things like coastal vegetated habitats. And of course, once we've implemented schemes, it's really critical where we have that cross section with investment that we can prove that those schemes are going on and that investment is actually there. It's, your mangrove forest or whatever is there. And having, your satellite, which is passing over a few times a week or more often, that is a very low sort of impact way to keep an eye on things like this. So I think it will be absolutely invaluable into the future in terms of things like, looking at ocean acidification and so on and so forth. It will be invaluable.
That's clear. Does anybody have anything to add on that innovation point? Louise?
Well, obviously, I mean, innovation is going to be key to ensure that the transition that Nick was talking about earlier actually happens. So strengthening efficiencies, but also bringing in sort of new business that is truly sustainable and fits in with the definition of a sustainable blue economy. So creating kind of that new pipeline that is investable and, a field of dreams approach, if you like. It's also key to make a lot of this data that's being collected, this big data, available to the finance sector as well, and to business, so that they can make good decisions themselves, particularly the finance sector, on how they're going to invest. And it also, again, strengthens the enabling environment. It de-risks the enabling environment because they're more able to actually obtain the data they need to make those decisions. So there's a need for quite a lot of data platforms that are accessible and that bring all this information together in a way that is accessible and understood by sectors that aren't necessarily, in the weeds of science, if you like.
Thanks. Nick or James, do you have anything to add on innovation?
I think innovation is hugely important, as the others have said, for a sustainable blue economy, because we've got to escape from business as usual, and that means we need to do things differently, need to do new things. So technological innovation, absolutely important, but also different business models. How do we innovate around, for example, marine protected areas, instead of being something that costs the government money to pay for the protection of a marine protected area? Is it something that through a combination of different businesses being run sustainably in that area, of sustainable aquaculture, sustainable tourism, etc., there's a business model that will self-fund that marine protected area. And there's been a number of groups sort of playing around with that. There's some successful examples already out there. There's new products. I mean, seaweed is really coming up at the moment now as sort of a super product from the ocean, and being used in a lot of industrial processes. We're seeing it as a sort of addition to cattle feed that can reduce methane emissions by up to 90%. We're seeing it as an alternative to plastics. We're seeing it in terms of substituting animal products like gelatin in food, so increasing the amount of vegan food out there. There's a huge amount of opportunity for using marine products that can be grown sustainably, to also make the whole product development and supply chain more sustainable as well. But we've got some big challenges as well. I mean, we've got to innovate better on green shipping. We've got to cut shipping emissions as an urgent matter of priority, and make sure all our global trade is becoming sustainable. We've got to ensure that we use a lot more of the byproducts of fish if we're going to do that sustainably. That there's so much waste product out there that just gets discarded and is actually really valuable. So the fish oils from fish heads, making fish leather from fish skin, which is a really beautiful product, that using this 100% fish approach, I think is really important. So huge opportunities for innovation, and also, again, coming back to the regulatory side, unlocking the barriers to that. So, for example, one area of coastal risk is ocean acidification. It's often been locked up in because it's a climate problem with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolving in the ocean. On a local level, it's been seen, what can we do about it? It's a global problem. It belongs in COP discussions and so on. But actually, it's made a lot worse by things like agricultural runoff and eutrophication. And so looking at how you change your farming practices to improve coastal water quality can build resilience, increasing more seaweed aquaculture, and having seaweed aquaculture alongside shellfish and finfish aquaculture can really sort of help to boost the resilience of that environment against ocean acidification, and protect the businesses that rely on it. So there are policy solutions you can have that, again, require innovation, both in terms of new business ideas, but also innovation in policy.
Great, thank you, Michael. It's really helpful. I'd like to move us on now to something which I'm sure you'll all have something to say about. I'll start with you, James. So this question is about the role of governance, and what role does governance at national and international level have to play in ensuring that activities within the blue economy are sustainable? Big question.
I think it's at an international level, maybe looping back to the start of the discussion, it can help clear up exactly what is a blue economy or what is a sustainable blue economy. There is already guidance out there from UNEP, EU, WWF as well, I think. So we can use those, and then the proof is in the pudding really at national level, keeping your own house in order first and then sharing the learnings, and taking these international frameworks and commitments and actually putting them into practice. I'd like to see more countries having a specific strategy or plan for the ocean and for a blue economy. We've seen that in Portugal, I think, and we've seen that in Scotland. but it would be good to see more of it, so that the ocean isn't so much of an afterthought, sort of out of sight, out of mind, politically as well. So I think internationally it can help set the frameworks, and then nationally you can see it get more put into practice. And that would look a bit like having robust marine spatial planning processes as well, built around the value of marine natural capital. I think that's a good place to start, and then build it out from there. And there's great opportunity here for countries like the UK to be a world leader, if you want to put it that way. There's a chance for someone to take the reins and show what a blue economy can look like, and then that will set the precedent for other countries to follow.
Thanks, James. Louise, same question to you on governance, the role it can play.
I mean, I think I mentioned earlier this, and totally agree with James, this need for a strong sustainable blue economy plan at the national level. I think for me, it's really important that it is integrated governance that's going on. And we've seen much success actually in places like Belize, where the government bodies or the government departments are actually working together to a single strategy, and have formed a sort of council or a committee at the national level, where you have the tourism department working with the environment department, working with the climate department, working with the port development, whatever, but they're all working to a similar goal, and that's so key, because a decision made by one department to build a giant port somewhere may conflict significantly with another. So without that sort of integrated approach, it's going to be very challenging to do it any other way. I think the other thing is obviously having a multi-stakeholder approach and making sure that you're working with all the stakeholders who are affected in some way by the decisions that are being made, and that can also contribute significantly to the delivery of that sustainable blue economy plan. And one sort of group that comes to mind is the coastal communities themselves, which often don't have a voice in how decisions are being made, and certainly are the stewards of many of the conservation actions and the restoration and protection actions that need to happen in the coastal fringes. So making sure there's an opportunity for coastal communities to have a voice and to feed into the decisions and to feed into the sustainable blue economy plan and to benefit from it, and make sure that finance is trickling down to the community level for them to be able to manage and restore and also follow their own sustainable blue economy trajectory is absolutely key. So good governance and all of those aspects is absolutely critical to delivery of a sustainable blue economy. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. And I think we'll come back in a minute around that question around equity and stakeholders. But just to continue on this theme around governance, national, international level, Nick, what are your thoughts on it?
Thank you. Yeah, well, at the international governance level, in some ways, all countries have already committed to a sustainable blue economy because they've all signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 14 is very much about a sustainable blue economy. But we're a long way from achieving that, and there is some confusion in the international policy landscape around what a sustainable blue economy looks like. So, for example, there's a UN body, the International Seabed Authority, is there to regulate the exploitation of the seabed in areas beyond national jurisdiction, particularly for deep seabed mining. And there's been a lot of activity developing the regulations and payment regime and so on that are going to be in place should that activity take off. And some regional blue economy strategies include deep seabed mining as part of a sustainable blue economy. And yet, so UNEP's finance initiative, which has a series of robust criteria for what can count as sustainable financial investment into an ocean economy, are very clear that deep seabed mining does not meet its criteria. And so you see this sort of, on the one hand, people are sort of looking at, oh, there's an economic opportunity, we should include it in a blue economy. And others are saying, if you want to count this as sustainable, it doesn't meet our financial criteria, which are not just targeting that sector. They are looking across the piece and saying, these are what robust financial criteria for sustainable investment looks like. This doesn't meet it, and so there's a much greater need for clarity, I would say, in the international policy landscape. At a national scale, I mean, Louise highlighted Belize, and you know, a really great example at the moment. Seychelles has also been a really great example, and a number of particularly actually smaller countries, Fiji as well at the moment, you know, who are really pushing forward on a holistic approach to the role of the ocean, because it is existential for them. You know, when we talk about sustainable ocean economy, we're not talking about an environmental ocean policy. We're talking about something that allows the communities that have lived on and developed their livelihoods from the ocean, and their spirituality and their culture and everything, you know, that there's been there for generations, to continue that for generations, because they're not destroying the thing that it's been built upon. And so if you're a government in a small country, and you've got all these pressures coming at you, you don't know when the next hurricane's going to hit, you don't know what defenses you need to put in place. Every time one comes, you spend more money rebuilding back than you're going to earn in GDP over the next several years. There's all these pressures you've got to balance. And so where does a sustainable blue economy come in that, and how is it helping you achieve all those goals at once? It's really hard question, and if it wasn't, we'd all be doing it. I mean, I think the debt for nature swaps that countries like Belize and Seychelles and Bahamas, Barbados, and so on, and Ecuador more recently have adopted, where they really sort of are both reducing the amount of public debt they've got, reducing the amount they have to pay for it because it's being done with better credit rating, and it's being tied to nature outcomes, is really important, because it's a win-win-win solution, and is really empowering them to then act as a whole of government approach, because they have targets as a whole of government to deliver on this financing agreement. I think looking at, as Louise said earlier, insurance products that can help support that as well. That will incentivize maybe restoring coral reefs over building a sea wall, because you can insure the coral reef, and it's going to generate tourism income, and that there's new insurance products for that out there. You know, it can really help that. Living sea walls as well, rather than just pouring concrete in the ocean. But these are the stark choices governments having to face: is how do they protect their populations and ensure a livelihood for the future? And unless the sustainable and regenerative approach really cuts the mustard with them over some fairly short time frames as well, we don't have a lot of time to get these in place. They're going to be forced to go to other options, and so I think on a national level, getting really robust policies in place in a quick and timely way now is critical.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nick. That's really helpful. Claire, did you have anything to add on the governance question?
Yeah, so building on Nick mentioning there the deep sea mining, and I think another thing that we need to be very mindful of, and where there's a very clear need for good governance, is using the ocean for carbon dioxide removal. So there's a variety of ways that this can be done. We've spoken a little bit about coastal vegetation restoration, so you know, things like mangroves and seagrasses. But then there are some far more sort of geoengineering type approaches. And those, you know, we are in crisis. We know that now. We have to act quickly. We cannot decarbonize fast enough, you know. So these things are coming, and there's an immense amount of commercial interest in it, because of course the potential value of the carbon markets as we start to hit those targets for net zero. And so a lot of these schemes, so biomass sinking, capturing carbon dioxide and injecting it into the seabed, they have the potential for perverse outcomes. But we have to consider all the options. So I think governance is going to be key, and science, of course, to generate that data, to actually assess, well, what are the pros and cons of these schemes, and then put the appropriate legislation in place to make sure they are implemented in a sustainable way. But as I say, I don't think we should turn our back on them. It's just that we need to implement them in a really careful and sustainable way. So governance will be key there, I think.
Thanks, Claire. That was great. Just to move on, in the interest of time, I'll come to a couple of people on this next question. It's a big question, but I just want to focus it a little bit. So this is around stakeholders and equity. The question is really, who are the key stakeholders that need to be involved, and how do we ensure that equity is embedded in the decision making? Now, if one was to put, or society was to put a wind farm somewhere, how do you ensure that relevant people are included in that? Where's the community? If you want to create some seagrass habitat or salt marsh, or even remove it for a valid reason, for a government permit or something like that. I guess they're all decisions that are made at all sorts of levels. But I just want to briefly to ask, I guess, James, and then I'll come to Louise. So who are the stakeholders that need to be involved? And without saying everybody, because that might be the answer. And how can we ensure that equity is embedded in that decision making?
Sure. I'm going to steal Louise's answer from earlier about coastal communities being key stakeholders, because you've seen around the world, particularly with blue carbon projects, the success can hinge on how involved the local communities are as stewards and stakeholders safeguarding the marine environment. So I'd say that for certain. And then going more broadly, you've got policymakers and decision makers, which will be essential for, as I've talked about, laying the foundations for the blue economy, getting the ecological policy and financial conditions right. This needs to be informed by science and by conservationists as well, to explain where money should go, what needs to be maintained, what marine natural capital assets are worth, and so on. And then once you've got that foundation in place, then you bring in the financial sector and the private investors, firstly to understand their risks and their impacts on the ocean. So it's in their interest as well to protect value that they have linked to the ocean and to spend money to protect that value, but then also to start building up some of these opportunities that get created in the blue economy with things like marine natural capital markets and things like that. So I think everyone has a different role to play, and it's important that there's collaboration, that it's not done in silos, because there's only so far you can go doing it on your own. So I'd say open communication, as little bureaucracy as possible, within reason, obviously, and yeah, working together is going to make it all happen much quicker.
Thanks, James. And Louise, same question to you.
I mean, I 100% agree with all that. I think, transitioning to a sustainable blue economy is probably one of the biggest challenges and opportunities of our time. And we can't do it in silos. It has to be done in partnership. So anybody who has a stake in the ocean, which is pretty much everybody, but in particular the ones that are that can do something about it, they need to be contributing and working together and collaborating and forming really strategic partnerships in order to make sure that there's sufficient data available, that the data is available in the right form, that there's sufficient regulation in place, there's sufficient plans in place. I mean, there's a whole kind of enabling environment around this that needs multiple partners and stakeholders involved in making sure that delivery is possible. I mean, I think just in terms of communities, coastal communities, we really need to support them fully to transition towards a sustainable blue economy themselves. I mean, not all their activities are going in the right direction, and they're eroding their own resource base, largely, because of poverty and other sort of crucial issues, which are impacting the way that they may be managing their own resources. but also we're putting a huge burden on them because we are making them responsible for managing the ecosystems that are actually sequestering carbon for the whole of the planet. So we need to make sure that there is finance trickling from these massive commitments that are being made at the international level down to the community level in a way that's manageable for them, but that also supports their needs, their everyday needs, and that also then ensures that it's a win-win for everyone. And I think, you know, one of the things that we're looking at, for example, is how to really support communities to develop sustainable enterprises, so to move away from their own business as usual activities that might be degrading in some way, and to really support them to move towards more sustainable enterprises. And there's a huge amount of funding needed: seed finance, investment in capacity building, and other kind of actions that are really going to be needed to enable those communities to be investment ready, if you like, even for microfinance, and to be able to transition themselves. But you know, I mean, we should also think about, should we be paying communities to actually deliver some of these actions that need to be taken on behalf of the world? And that would be a really important conversation to have going forwards.
Thanks, Louise. Really interesting points there at the end. Nick, do you have anything to add on this point on communities?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think there's some really important points being made about local communities and indigenous communities who have so much knowledge of stewardship of our world that we really need to be listening to them. But I want to highlight some more global equity issues. I mean, 60% of the Commonwealth is under the age of 30. The young population, youth in the Commonwealth is defined as 18 to 30. So our youth is that's the majority of our constituency, and they're the ones going to be living with the impact of unsustainable practice. And so delivering the world for them and their children is really critical. Intergenerational equity as well. The inequity between the global north and the south in the way we exploit the oceans is also absolutely critical, that it's addressed. And so, as in with the energy transition, there's been talk about a just transition, and what does a just transition look like for decarbonisation and the energy transition? What does a just transition look like for a sustainable blue economy? So, and I think oil and gas is a good example that transitions both energy and blue economy, in the sense that offshore, most of sort of oil and gas is now coming from offshore. There's a lot of countries in the global south with offshore oil and gas deposits and exploration going on. Some that are new producers already have it coming online. What does the future look like for them? There's, you know, I know some small island developing states that are exploring for petroleum while leading the fight on climate change. They don't want to exploit these resources, but they're saying, if the world doesn't change, we have no choice, because we have to develop as well. And if you're not giving us other finance options, where else are we going to get the income from? But equally, you know, at COP29, there was the statement of transitioning away from fossil fuels. That's giving a really strong signal to the markets. We're already seeing a lot of major investors decarbonizing their portfolios. And for countries that come late to the game on oil and gas, there's a very real risk of stranded assets and as well. So they're really being trapped from all quarters, a lot of countries in the global south. And so we need to look at what a just transition looks like. Does it mean that for the remaining carbon budget that the world's going to spend, we should buy from producers in the global south, and the northern markets should cut their production first? Does it mean that those who have not come online yet, we should be paying them to keep the resources in the ground? and helping them develop other sustainable industries, both within a blue economy and elsewhere. So these are the real equity questions we have to address as a global community. If we're not going to create even more inequity and leave much of the world behind as we transition.
Thanks, Nick. We're charging towards our end here, and I've got a couple of things I want to raise with you before that. And I've got quite a big question here. We've talked about lots of the barriers, but I just wanted to come to a couple of you and just really ask, and I'll come to you first, Claire. What are the main barriers to ensuring this happens? We talked about sustainable growth for the blue economy, talked about equity just now, we talked about technology, but I guess very high level, what are the main barriers that are stopping this happening?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think it's basically all the things you say. So of course it's a holistic problem, if you like, and the barriers are such. So at the moment we have overexploitation, we have habitat degradation ongoing. Some of our coastal habitats are the most rapidly degrading habitats on the planet. So we have to deal with all of that. There's, we've heard today about a lot of the problems with the ocean is stemming from activities on land. So we need this kind of holistic viewpoint, and that isn't yet there. I don't think we're necessarily connecting the dots. So, I mean, just as an example, I work a lot in Southeast Asia on how land use change is influencing coastal ecosystem services. And we have massive deforestation there, which is utterly changing the functioning of our whole ocean, actually. So it's really, really key. And so it's about generating that lack of knowledge so we can build those governance frameworks that are going to be able to manage these problems. And of course, we've just heard about the issues of, it's absolutely key that we take everyone along with us, including those that have been disadvantaged historically into the past. So it's about unlocking the knowledge that local communities have and giving them a voice, and also being participatory in any kind of decision making and getting equal benefits from the blue economy. And sorting out some of these issues we still have with things like displacement and land tenure insecurity, and then just building this all into informed decision making, and of course bringing in or creating opportunities for innovators, for entrepreneurship to come in and support the sustainable development of our blue economy, so we can foster that innovation that's so desperately needed.
That's clear. That was really interesting. Great, thank you. I'm just going to start wrapping up, and I just want to come to each of you really, and what I'd like you to think about, to answer really, is what's your one call for action, or perhaps there's something we haven't spoken about today that you'd like to raise, or one point you'd like to leave us with. So I'm going to come to each of you now. So I'll start with you, James. So what's your kind of final point, really?
I would really like to reframe the common narrative that spending and investing in the environment comes at the expense of other economic and political goals. And I'd like people very much to see that actually you can gain a lot in terms of job creation, economic growth, coastal identities and livelihoods. So get away from this mindset that we're doing this at the expense of other things. And then more broadly linking into this theme of systems thinking, recognizing how independent we are, our economy and our financial system is on the oceans and on ocean health, and then also respecting what we don't understand. And we are going into an uncertain future where we'll have a changing climate. So by having healthy ecosystems, they'll be better prepared and better able to react and adapt to these changes, which means we are in turn bestowing ourselves with a more resilient and adaptable economy as well. So it's very much in our interests, and it's very much within all the different stakeholders that we've mentioned. It's in their interests to protect the ocean.
Thank you. I'll come to you next, Nick. What's the thing you'd like to leave us with?
I think we need to really support governments to make the changes they need to make. So whether that's through the diplomatic voice, the democratic voice we have, making sure at the polls, that they know these matters count. That's important. But for a lot of governments in the global south, getting the finance to support the transition is really hard. Overseas development assistance is really only goes to the least developed countries, and a lot of middle income countries are missing out on that preferential financing and finding it really hard to access that finance. So making sure the technical capacity building, the finance and the support that is needed by those governments is there to allow them to do what they actually want to do. I mean, one of the things I hear time and time again from the Commonwealth countries is they want to work together for a sustainable ocean. A sustainable ocean is hugely important to them, but how they do that without the resources to make the transition is really hard. So I think if we can unlock that, we can really make progress.
Brilliant, thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Yeah, so it's been mentioned a few times today about this natural capital accounting. And I think sometimes for us, as scientists or conservationists or so, it might be seen as distasteful to put a sort of value on things. But I think it's actually quite important, because if you can properly quantify all the goods and services that the marine environment provides, then that makes it a lot easier to see the true value of the ocean and the impacts of the activities within it. So, we might want a quick win off deep sea mining, but actually then if you look at the damage to the seabed, potentially, I don't know for sure yet, but potentially that could be costing us a lot more into the future. So I think that's so important. And also incorporating, as has been also mentioned, different types of value. So there's cultural value, there's the value of having a job and a healthy environment in which to live by. So I think all of those things are really central to creating the pathways to sustainable governments and pathways for investment as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. And Louise.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really trying to make sure that we strongly showcase that business as usual is to both public and private sector. Business as usual is a lose-lose for everyone, and it is not going to lead to environmental, social, or economic resilience for anyone. So we need to really look to new sustainable development pathways. I think just to say one thing that I haven't mentioned is that there is information available to the finance sector now through the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles and the guidance that produces across 8 maritime sectors, actually, to actually say to the finance sector, both public and private, don't invest in this, do invest in that, and transition this. And that is, so I'm constantly told that there isn't clarity on how they should go about with this transition and the investments that should be made and where they shouldn't be investing. But that information exists now under the UNEP-FI Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative. And there's also the Task Force for Nature related financial disclosures, which is coming on stream, the TNFD. So I think more and more there is greater levels of accountability and the frameworks that underpin that available. So we can't accept that as an excuse anymore. There is information available. It probably needs to be made better available, and that kind of transition is possible with the right kind of will. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm sure you will all agree we've had a fantastic discussion today. I'd just like to thank our wonderful panel, Louise Heaps, Nick Hardman-Mountford, Claire Evans and James Merchant. And a big thank you to the Institution of Environmental Science for bringing us all together today. And I hope all of you watching enjoy this seminar and find it as stimulating as I have. So it just leaves me to say thank you and goodbye.